In 1992, a middle-aged man, in front of him was a camera from the Spanish national television. Even knowing that thousands of people would see this interview, the man remained relaxed, smoking one cigarette after another. He then said, "I am a very quiet person. I do not mess with anyone." If it were an interview with an ordinary person, such an answer would be quite ordinary. But this middle-aged man was named Manuel Delgado Villegas. Even after death, even after decades had passed, he remained the most notorious and active serial killer in Spain. From 1964 to 1971, Manuel killed at least 48 victims. His crimes could not be called murders, but rather voluntary manslaughter. He never killed with premeditation. He was driven by the desire to rob and by fits of anger. Sometimes, a simple trivial from the victim could be perceived as an insult by him, leading him to kill them with violence. So, quiet, its meaning had almost nothing to do with him. On January 25, 1943, Manuel was born in Seville, Spain. That was a terrible period. Spain had just emerged from the Civil War and millions of people were affected. Seville, in particular, was in a time of severe shortage. Manuel's childhood was filled with hunger, his father's corporal punishment, and the absence of motherly love. His mother died of childbirth complications when he was born, at the age of 24, so he never experienced the warmth of a mother's love. His father, Martin, though he took on the responsibility of caring for him, could never provide the affection he deserved. Martin was a traditional father. In order to make a living, he did the most menial jobs, relying on selling scrap metal and a kind of concentrated juice used for making desserts to barely cover the family's expenses. In those hard times, due to financial difficulties, Martin eventually sent the two children to live with their grandmother in Mataró. He gave up custody of his children and chose to remarry. Manuel's grandmother lived in the La Salela neighborhood, a community predominantly inhabited by Andalusians. There, after entering school, Manuel never acquired the ability to read and write, and his academic performance was also poor. So he began to avoid school, preferring to wander the streets and engage in fights. In addition, he was bisexual and had a certain reputation in the local homosexual and prostitute circles. That was not due to his sexual orientation, but because he suffered from anejaculation, meaning he was unable to ejaculate. This condition allowed him to last longer during sexual intercourse, enabling his partners to achieve multiple orgasms. Over time, promiscuity became a normal part of Manuel's life, and his personality became increasingly violent. In 1961, at the age of 18, Manuel joined the Spanish Legion. During this time, he learned a lethal technique called the deadly blow, which involves striking the opponent's throat with a knife-hand strike to shatter the trachea and cause asphyxiation. However, during his service, he began to use marijuana and showed symptoms of schizophrenia. Whether real or feigned, in the end, he was medically discharged as unfit for service. In the early days after Manuel's discharge, he mainly relied on odd jobs to make a living, including selling homemade syrup. However, several months later, because no money, he became homeless. From then on, he began to wander along the Mediterranean coast, in Spain, Italy, and France. His main means of survival were begging, stealing from villas in the countryside, and engaging in prostitution. During this time, he was also arrested several times for violating the law of social danger. Although this was the case, Manuel was never truly imprisoned, as he always exhibited symptoms suggestive of schizophrenia. During his time as a wanderer that, starting in 1964 at the age of 20, he began his indiscriminate killing spree. On January 21, 1964, while walking near the beach in Catalonia, he found Adolfo, a 49-year-old chef, were sleeping. Without hesitation, he picked up a stone from the ground and smashed Adolfo's skull with a single blow before stealing his watch and wallet. Manuel's crimes primarily targeted isolated individuals who were vulnerable to opportunistic attacks. His modus operandi involved blunt force trauma, supplemented by the deadly blow he had learned in the Spanish Legion, or by manually strangling his victims to subdue and kill them. According to police reports and his own confessions, he never killed with premeditation. His actions were more often driven by the desire to rob, fits of anger, or sexual urges. On June 20, 1967, Manuel committed a crime on the island of Ibiza. The victim was a 21-year-old French female tourist named Margaret. On the day of the crime, he infiltrated the resort where she was staying, suffocated her to death by covering her mouth and nose with a pillow. Because he had a necrophilia fetish, he sexually assaulted her corpse and then stole her belongings. July 20th, 1968, Manuel killed an elderly man named Venancio in Madrid. On the day of the crime, he begged Venancio for food. The elderly man told him that he was still young and should find a job if he wanted to eat. But Manuel became furious. He beat Venancio, threw him into the Tajuna River, and held his head underwater until he drowned. On April 5th, 1969, Manuel killed a man named Ramon in Barcelona. Ramon was the owner of a furniture company and had been a long-term client of Manuel's sexual services. On the day of the crime, the two were in Ramon's dealership, planning to engage in a sexual transaction. Manuel asked for about $10 as payment, and Ramon agreed. However, after the sexual service was over, Ramon only paid about $3. Overcome with anger, Manuel struck Ramon's neck and beat him with a broken armchair, eventually pushing him down the stairs. On November 23, 1969, in Catalonia, Manuel killed a 68-year-old woman named Anastasia. He struck her head violently with a brick and pushed her off a bridge, causing her death. And over the next 4 days, he repeatedly returned to the scene to violate her corpse. On December 3, 1970, Manuel killed Francisco, a 28-year-old electrician. On the day of the crime, he used the deadly blow to shatter Francisco's trachea and then threw his body into the Guadalquivir River. Later, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy informed the local police that Francisco's cause of death was not drowning, but very likely murder. This discovery brought Manuel's criminal activities to the attention of the police for the first time. On January 18, 1971, Manuel met with Antonia, a 38-year-old woman with mild intellectual disabilities, in Puerto de Santa Maria, Cadiz province, the same town where he had killed Francisco. Antonia, a well-known mentally disabled person in the area, had been in a relationship with Manuel for sexual purposes, and he had even introduced her to his father as his girlfriend. On the day of the crime, he rode a motorcycle with Antonia to a secluded spot in the countryside to have sex. There, he strangled her to death. For the next 3 nights, he repeatedly returned to the location where he had left her body and violated her corpse. Because of the close relationship between Antonia and Manuel, and because witnesses who had seen Manuel taking Antonia away on his motorcycle realized that she had not been seen for several days, they immediately contacted the police. Later, the 2 officers in charge of the case quickly identified Manuel as a suspect and brought him to the police station for questioning. At first, Manuel said he was at the cinema when it happened and showed a ticket stub as his alibi, but he couldn't even remember the movie's plot. On February 21st, after they found Antonia's body, Manuel had no choice but to confess his crime to the interrogators and admit to killing her. During his confession, Manuel said, "We tried various sexual positions as usual, but she suggested something that I found repulsive. When I refused, she insulted me, saying I wasn't a man, had been with other men. I punched her, but she still didn't shut up and continued to insult me. This poor woman didn't realize she was signing her own death warrant, so I took the one-piece bodysuit she had taken off and put it around her neck, strangling her while having sex." He also revealed his necrophilia fetish, saying, "I went to be with her on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. If I hadn't been caught, I would have continued." In the following hours, Manuel confessed to an extra 47 cases. While verifying the cases, he was taken to different parts of Spain and became the first criminal in Spain to be escorted by a special plane to different locations nationwide to validate his shocking confessions. On the way to a crime scene, Manuel heard on the radio about the arrest of the Mexican-American serial killer Juan Corona, who was believed to have killed nearly 50 people at the time. Hearing this news, he became furious. He demanded that police release him for a few days, let he kill a few more people, claiming that he could not allow Mexicans to kill more people than Spaniards. Although Manuel claimed to have killed 48 people, the Spanish police only confirmed the authenticity of 22 cases. Among these, they have found evidence for only 7 murders. Later, due to Manuel's deteriorating mental state, no trial was held. Instead, in accordance with the criminal procedural law, a ruling of non-prosecution was issued and his case was closed. He was later detained at the Carabanchel Penitentiary Psychiatric Hospital. Meanwhile, several Spanish newspapers extensively covered Manuel's case, and a bunch of doctors said they wanted to talk to him. After examination, although Manuel was labeled as a typical psychiatric patient, some doctors believed that he might suffer from a severe mental disorder that detached him from reality. For instance, when he led the police to the location where Anastasia's body was hidden, he described her as a beautiful 20-year-old girl, even though she was actually a 68-year-old woman. Experts who studied Manuel's case unanimously agreed that Manuel should not be released because he was a born criminal, a murderer who could cause great harm throughout his life. Due to genetic abnormalities, he lacked a conscience, a sense of guilt and remorse. He considered his actions normal, even when committing murder. Over time, Manuel's physical health took a turn for the worse. He gained weight, started losing his hair, walked with a shuffling gait, and began experiencing delusions, even though he was only in his 40s in 1985. While he was in prison, he smoked a lot of cigarettes, one after another, and got chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. On February 2, 1998, Manuel, Spain's most infamous serial killer, passed away from lung disease. His story came to a complete end. His family, father, sister never appeared again, not even at his funeral.